Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to be an examination of Rancho del Cielo, the 688 acre hillside ranch provisionally owned or assigned to Ronald Reagan, who was the 40th president of the United States of America. And I've personally been on the property. I haven't been on every single millimeter of the property, but I can tell you that it is quintessential California. It's what I think about when I close my eyes and fall asleep. When I think about what's beautiful about California, I think in terms of the images that are conjured up from a visit to Rancho del Cielo, the ranch in the sky, the ranch of the sky. Has some similarities with Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger were brutally bayonet murdered by M7 bayonets. You know, that's the Love House. Of course, if you just knew even 1% of what I knew about the poppycock mythology of that, I've been on that property also, people. And let me just tell you something. You're not talking about one house. You're talking about 8 houses. You're talking about 3 or 4 swimming pools, and you're talking about potentially 22 showers that murderers could clean up in. So you're talking about a surveillance party, clandestine service, scandal, Hollywood set. And that's what it is. And it was built by RKO. So anyway, I'm just telling you, when you have a drive called Cielo Drive, and it runs parallel to Benedict Canyon and also to Bel Air Road and Angelo Drive, you are in the eye of the devil of a surveillance canyon, amphitheater, an amphitheater. And of course, amphitheaters are known for the noise abatement, keeping things in a controlled environment, and multiple places from which to watch the show. It's called surveillance. It's called surveillance if you're not really a ticket purchaser. You're spying. If you didn't buy a ticket to the show and you're watching the show, I guess you're surveilling. Anyway, we have that situation with everything with CIA. I wanted to tell you some disclosures up front. I personally met Ronald Reagan. I met him in December 1980. So he had won the election in a landslide over Jimmy Carter. Yeah, but he hadn't taken the oath of office yet, which he does that on January 21st, 1981. I believe Ronald Reagan took office as the 40th president. Let me make sure I got that. I get his inauguration as governor of California mixed up with his inauguration for the 40th president of the United States. But typically that's the 3rd week in January, isn't it? So for purposes of today's discussion, we're going to say he took office on January 21st, 1981. I met him at the Travel Lodge Hotel in the lobby. Well, actually it wasn't in the lobby. It was in the hallway for the conference facilities on the ground floor of the hotel. It's not exactly on the pancake ground floor. It's about 6 feet off of where you park your cars. So it's elevated. And he was accompanied with, as far as I can remember, 4 Secret Service suited gentlemen who looked to be in their 30s and 40s years old. Ronald Reagan was 69 years old in December 1980. And I walked out of a conference I was in to get a glass of water and to refill my water. And there he was. I walked right into him. And he stopped and we spoke for 3 to 5 minutes. It's kind of hard to remember the exact time. I didn't time it. We would have spoken. I got the impression we'd speak for 30 minutes because he was very affable, friendly, good-natured, in a good mood. He looked like a movie star. He was wearing a brown suit. He had a suntan. It's December. It's winter. He's a winner, and it's winter. And his security team stayed back. They kept their distance, and they didn't even seem to be paying attention to what we were talking about, which I don't remember what we talked about. But I did congratulate him on, becoming the 40th president of the United States, and we just chit-chatted, and then the conversation ended because it became clear that behind me were about 20 to 30 of my fellow conventionaires that were encircling us. So it's one of those situations that becomes awkward. We were having a private conversation, and then 24 people showed up to eavesdrop on our conversation. So I just wished him well, and he headed out the door into the parking lot with his security team. It might have been 5. I remember 4 security guards. And there he went, out into the parking lot. This is at LAX. This is at Los Angeles Airport, the travel lodge that's the closest proximity to the airport. It's not exactly a super upscale hotel, right? So I was very surprised to see Ronald Reagan there. I knew he went to the Century Plaza Hotel, which I've stayed at in Beverly Hills, which is adjacent to the twin office towers there, where I had an office, and I used to turn my expense reports in there. My main office was San Francisco, in the Darth Vader building. That's what we called it, where the Banker's Heart is located, the Swedish granite rock Banker's Heart, cold as ice. 52-story Darth Vader building known as the Bank of America World Headquarters Tower, where I had an office very high up in that building. And the executive offices for Bank of America at that time were on the 47th floor. Carnelian Room and the Bankers Club was located on the 52nd floor of that building. That building was the most expensive office rent of San Francisco, and it was a secured building. They had blue blazer security, people that moved around. There was no part of the Bank of America building that was more secure than the private banking floor on the mezzanine level. There, you couldn't get in there with an M16 rifle. I mean, my God. I can only imagine what it's like today with the COVID operation. You probably can't get anywhere on that block without your Vax passport, digital wallet. I mean, I wouldn't want to go anywhere near that satanic tower today. Anyway, I'm getting off track, but my visit with Ronald Reagan in December 1980, where he was the president-elect but hadn't taken office yet, was pleasant. It was brief. He made a positive impression, and I actually went out and bought a brown suit after that, because Ronald Reagan's the only person in my life that I ever saw wear a brown suit that made it look really good. He's 69 years old, and off he goes. So that's how I start my Ronald Reagan story. But if you really want to know about Ronald Reagan, who was twice the president of the Screen Actors Guild, which I've already done a video that's a cult, and basically I'm shaking hands with the leader of the cult, right? Except I don't believe the president of the Screen Actors Guild is running the show, okay? I don't believe the 40th president of the United States, presidential-elect Ronald Reagan, ever ran the show. And I don't believe he ran the United States, California, the gold rush state, the golden state of California. When he was governor of California, I don't think Ronald Reagan was running the show. He's taking orders. Remember, we follow orders or people die. And people do die, especially in California. They get whacked. All right, so before Ronald Reagan was the 40th president of the United States, of course, he was the governor of the state of California. And he was the governor of the state of California when Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger were bayoneted to death by NATO soldiers using M16 rifles with M7 bayonets. And Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. Ethel Younger was the district attorney of Los Angeles County. He worked for the OSS and the United States Army and was a brigadier general in the Air Force, having spent 0 time in the Air Force. So, in terms of military authority, Ethel Younger of Los Angeles was higher up the food chain than Ronald Reagan, the actor. But hey, Ronald Reagan is governor, and Ethel Younger goes on to become the Attorney General of the state of California under Ronald Reagan, but not yet, because we had to take care of that Sirhan Railroad. Remember, Robert Kennedy was assassinated on Wilshire Boulevard in the Ambassador Hotel, which is a piece of junk, tear-down dump of a hotel. which would explain why Robert Kennedy wanted no part of the Ambassador Hotel. But he got driven in from the Malibu gated colony by John Frankenheimer in his Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud III. If you can imagine being taken on a death procession down to, which is about an hour drive from Malibu, to be murdered. And of course, they blamed Sirhan on the murder, who had a .22 caliber pistol that was shooting all over into the ceiling and shot some other people, and nobody died except Robert Kennedy, who was shot in the right side of his skull behind his ear by a .22 caliber weapon, which was fired by Thane Eugene Caesar, who was an employee of the Skunk Works Lockheed at the Hollywood Burbank Airport. That's where he worked. He also worked for the Hughes Aeronautics Company for CIA, because Lockheed is CIA, and Robert Mayhew was Thane Eugene Caesar's control agent for Hughes Aircraft. Hughes Aircraft is a military contractor. Lockheed is a military contractor. They're in charge of all technical surveillance, whether it's 5G towers or SR-71 spy plane, U-2 spy plane, Francis Gary Powers, Thane Eugene Caesar, John Benet Ramsey. John Benet Ramsey garroted her father, John Ramsey, worked for Lockheed, executive vice president for Lockheed. So don't be surprised when you hear that Sharon Tate is murdered and her father works for Army Intelligence in Haight-Ashbury, living near Nancy and Paul Pelosi, who were 29 years old when 26-year-old Sharon Tate was murdered. Paul Tate, her father, lived next to the Pelosis, a couple of blocks from the Pelosis, in officer housing, just through the wall. There's an easement. You can just walk from the Pelosi house over to have drinks with Sharon Tate's father. Don't be surprised when you hear that a daughter of a CIA operative gets murdered. Happens all the time. It happened to Ines Mejia, who was the primary banker for all things CIA in San Francisco in 1969. Her daughter Abigail was bayoneted to death. Paul Tate's daughter was bayoneted to death 16 times. He lived next to the Pelosis in Presidio Heights. Are you surprised? Really? Are you? If you watch my videos, you won't be. Anyway, I'm bringing this back to Ronald Reagan because I'm also going to bring in another video I did about William Holden, who, by the way, in case you don't know, I've posted almost 100 videos now, and my overwhelmingly popular, most popular video of all is the William Holden murder video, where some people still think that William Holden is a drunkard who fell over and cracked his head with a baseball bat, and then the bat disappeared. Whatever the blunt force object was that hit William Holden in the head. He's not wearing his pajama bottoms, but somehow he murder-suicides himself because he's in a drunken stupor. If you believe that, then I got a bridge to sell you over here in San Francisco called the Golden Gate Bridge, and I own it, and I'll sell you, for $50 a month, you can own a piece of that. Okay? I double dare you. Go ahead. Take me up on it. I'll even send you a certificate of ownership signed off on by the CIA. All right, so Ronald Reagan's ranch was then provisionally assigned to him. I want to back up, though, because when Ronald Reagan is on his second marriage, after he was divorced from Jane Wyman, he then married Nancy Reagan, not her real name. And he married Nancy Reagan on March 4th, 1952. It was an impromptu marriage. We know that because he married her at the Little Brown Church. The Little Brown Church in Studio City, which is walking distance to the CBS television studios, is also in close proximity to where William Shatner's third wife, Noreen, ended up murder-suicided into the bottom of a swimming pool. Is close to the Little Brown Church where Ronald Reagan married Nancy Davis. Not a real name. And he had dinner in Beverly Hills with Nancy Davis at Chasen's. They had a booth there. And I guess they had been dating for about 2 years, which is about 2 years longer than your typical Hollywood marriage goes. Usually you just get married first and you do the dating until the divorce. You date until the divorce. I have not seen any courtship or dating of anybody in Hollywood except for the Ronald Reagan case where he allegedly he knew Nancy Davis for many years, but he allegedly was dating her for 2. Then somebody gave somebody an ultimatum, I guess, and they picked up the phone and they called William Holden and his wife at the time, and he joined them in Studio City at the Little Brown Church, where Ronald Reagan took the vow of marriage to Nancy Davis on March 4th, 1952. And because they have like 15-hour days at the Brown Church, you can get married almost anytime. It's like McDonald's. It's not 24 hours, but it's wide hours of coverage. So Little Brown Church does a lot of collects a lot of fees for marriages because it's just-in-time marriages, and that's what Ronald Reagan's second marriage was. It was a last-minute affair, and the only people that attended were William Holden, who was the best man, and his wife. So the 4 of them. And I don't know what happened after the wedding. I don't have intel on that. Ronald Reagan was 41 years old, and what you should know is that Bill Holden is a few years younger, I believe. And yeah, because see, remember, okay, I'll tell you how old William Holden was as best man, but let me just tell you the irony of this Ronald Reagan marriage. He marries Nancy Davis on March 4th, 1952. William Holden is his best man, okay? Then Ronald Reagan goes on to become, the Screen Actors Guild president, which he is twice. Now, he is the president of the Screen Actors Guild when he marries Nancy Davis. Ronald Reagan is the president of the Screen Actors Guild. Okay? That's 1952. He was president for 1947 to 1952. Ronald Reagan was a Democrat. He was a registered Democrat. He was an anti-communist Democrat, whatever that means. It's wokeism. And it's applied linguistics. It's sophistry. There's no such thing as anti-communist. There's no such thing as Democrat. There's no such thing as Republican. That's all applied linguistics. That's sophistry. There's bank-controlled totalitarianism. That's what there really is. If you want to be brutally honest, there are no Democrats. Nancy Pelosi's not a Democrat. Dianne Feinstein's not a Democrat. They're a member of a satanic cult. Okay? And there's Republicans in there, and there's Democrats in there, and there's atheists in there, and there's Jewish people in there, and there's Roman Catholics in there, and there's Jesuits in there too. It's one totalitarian bank satanic cult. That's what I'm calling it. Ronald Reagan marries Nancy Davis. He's the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and he's just finishing up his term there at SAG, which is a Hollywood cult. Then he goes on to become the spokesman for General Electric, which he signs up for an 8-year contract with General Electric, who is the #1 exhibitor, like the World's Fair. They're the #1 exhibitor for Disneyland, which hasn't been open yet. It's going to be open the next year. So it's appropriate that Ronald Reagan be the Hollywood spokesperson for the GE television theater, as well as all things publicity involving GE, which brings good things to life. And so Ronald Reagan signs his contract with GE. He, of course, gets selected to be a Masters of Ceremony, along with Art Linkletter, who's the #1 child's television star of the world. Art Linkletter and Ronald Reagan, who are really the same ages, and they're going to host the grand opening in 1955 of Hollywood, which would make Ronald Reagan about 44 years old, and I think Art Linkletter's 45, 44. And they're the master of ceremonies. And Fess Parker, who plays Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett on Disney Sunday nights, he rides the horse down Main Street, USA, in front of the Matterhorn, which is from Switzerland, which, in case you don't know, that's a Swiss center of clandestine banking. That's what the Matterhorn means. It's near Lake Geneva. It's near Lake Lucerne. The Matterhorn? I know, I did a bike ride over there, okay? Everything I know, I learned through cycling. Okay, and I've done over 2,000 miles of cycling in Switzerland, northern Italy, the Maritime Alps, France, which includes Cannes, Nice, Monte Carlo, Monaco, the Principality of Monaco, the Principality of San Remo, over to Naples, up and over through the risotto rice section, over to Lago Varese, Lago Lugano, Lago Maggiore, Lago Como, Lago Azeo, gee whiz, another dozen lakes, I don't even remember their names. Over to Verona, where Sharon Tate was put on a NATO missile and taken photographs when she was only 16 years old. There she is, wearing a leotard and a cowgirl hat. So Ronald Reagan marries Nancy Davis. He finishes up his duties as SAG president. He immediately signs with General Electric. He then gets a gig at Disneyland with Art Linkletter to grand open Disneyland to children and their parents and do social engineering for children. 1955. William Holden is good friends with Ronald Reagan. Let me just continue on. We move into the 60s. On July 2nd, 1966, Ronald Reagan's friend, William Holden, is in Tuscany, Italy, on vacation. He has two 21-year-old twin girls in the back seat of his Ferrari. And he gets into a roid rage situation with a guy named Lino, who's a 42-year-old salesman on those narrow roads. And he tries to pass Lino on the inside, drives him off the road in a manslaughter attempted murder, killing the native Italian salesman who Gus wasn't in a hurry to get to his next appointment. And then William Holden is found guilty of manslaughter, and the judge sentences him to 8 months in prison but suspends the sentence. So no harm, no foul. This is the Paul Pelosi situation. Paul Pelosi was involved in a vehicular manslaughter, which resulted in the killing of his older brother, David Pelosi, age 19, killed by the reckless driving of Paul Pelosi, age 16, who was attending St. Ignatius High School in San Francisco, Jesuit. But they wrote it up as the neck brace killed David, not Paul, who wrecked the car. That's why Paul needs 4 garages in Pacific Heights, because he wrecks his cars a lot. You know, he just wrecked his car up in Napa County in Oakville, where he took out Jesus Lopez at 10:15 p.m., falling down drunk in a 2021 Porsche Carrera that can go 200 miles an hour, 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds. It only had 2,700 miles on the odometer. And there's Paul Pelosi totaling the car as he torpedoes Jesus Lopez. And that gets written up as a misdemeanor DUI. It's black magic, people. And where that hammer attack, the alleged fake hammer attack, he doesn't live there. That's not his home. That's temporary housing while they remodel the big home that's 4 times bigger with the panoramic views that's on Pacific Avenue, not on Broadway. Okay, so don't fall for the diversions and deceptions. Just like I'm not falling for the... trying to do this Ronald Reagan story, it's hard to do because I know I'm drifting. So Ronald Reagan has to be a little disturbed, but of course he wins the governorship of California at the same time that his friend dodges a manslaughter guilty plea in Tuscany, Italy. And by the way, if you haven't been to Tuscany and Florence, I highly recommend it. It's paradise. Apparently it wasn't paradise for William Holden, but he did dodge a bullet, so to speak, and that he didn't have to spend any time in the Italian jail system. Because he's an important Hollywood social engineer, right? So they don't have to follow the normal rules. So Ronald Reagan becomes governor of California in November 1966. He takes office on January 2nd, 1967. That's when we have all those peace riots in Berkeley, and we have the Summer of Love CIA operation going on in Haight-Ashbury. So what I'm trying to tell you is the Pelosi family are in New York, so they're not implicated in 1967. They don't show up in San Francisco to 1977. You know, when Abigail Folger gets bayoneted, that's when Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi show up in San Francisco. When Enos Mejia, the private banker for San Francisco, is now in a traumatic state of mourning, that's when Paul Pelosi moves the money laundering or private banking office to San Francisco. It was right around the time that Abigail Folger got done away with by CIA NATO forces. So Ronald Reagan is governor during the Summer of Love, 1967. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, twice president of the Screen Actors Guild, 1947 and 1952, and again in 1959 and 1960, which is after he was master of ceremonies for Disneyland, but he's still the spokesperson for General Electric. He does his second stint for 1 year for Screen Actors Guild. He goes on to become the governor of California. What could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? Well, he calls in the National Guard and they shoot, buckshot into the crowd. They kill one of the students, cause another guy to be permanently blinded. They have tear gas. None of these kids are doing anything illegal. They're following their United States constitutional right for free assembly. But apparently the invisible hand doesn't want that, and they tell Ronald Reagan what to do, because Ronald Reagan is not running the show. He's not calling in the National Guard. The invisible hand is. So I've got Evel Younger in Los Angeles, and he wants to railroad Sirhan at the exact time that Ronald Reagan is dealing with the peace riots. That's what the media called it. That's applied linguistics. Just so you know, they were protesting the draft. They were protesting conscription and the Vietnam War, which you had a 50% chance of being sent to Vietnam if you were drafted. So that's what the kids were protesting, the rules having to do with mandates involving conscription. But the media turned it into the peace riots, that these young kids going to college would be protesting peace, which is absurd, right? In other words, they're knuckleheads taking LSD. But the LSD comes from the CIA, from Sandow's Swiss pharmacy, today known as Novartis. And by the way, you know where the WHO is located, right? World Health Organization, Geneva, Switzerland, near the Matterhorn. Geneva, Switzerland. The WHO, the World Health Organization, which is what Google and YouTube use their policies to delete and edit content at their search sites. That's a Swiss banking center, people. Geneva, Switzerland. That was the last bank that Roberto Calvi visited before he was murder-suicided in London, central London, underneath the Blackfriars Bridge. Geneva, Switzerland. That's who runs the WHO. Geneva, Switzerland, that's who runs Google and YouTube. Geneva, Switzerland. That's who Walt Disney worships. All right, so New World Order. So Ronald Reagan's governor of California. He's aware that his friend William Holden has dodged a manslaughter charge in terms of punishment. And then we have the Sharon Tate murders. 4 months goes by. Nobody knows who did it. Nobody knows who did it. There's no evidence to link any Charlie Scott Manson. No evidence to implicate Charles Watson. None to implicate Susan Atkins. Nothing. But after 120 days, Evel Younger decides. Evel Younger, or whoever controls Evel Younger, decides, hey, let's just wrap this thing up, kind of like what we do with Sirhan, but let's do it now. And so the first thing they do is they plan evidence. On September 1st, before Charlie Manson, anyone knew who he was, a .22 caliber bunt line pistol, 12 inches long barrel, used to be an Army issue pistol. Ronald Reagan used that pistol during his cowboy career over at the Spahn Ranch, the George Spahn Ranch in Ventura County, no, in Los Angeles County, near Canoga Park, near Chatworth, which is near Canoga Park, the porn center. And when Ronald Reagan retired from his acting, he gave a pistol that resembled the .22 caliber buntline pistol to the Wrangler, the 6'6" tall gentleman, Shorty Shea, Jerome Shorty Shea, who was the wrangler who ran the horse rental operation at the George Spahn Ranch. And then this is where this convoluted story that because Charlie Manson visited the ranch, Shorty Shea must have given him that pistol, and then he gave the pistol to Charlie Watson, who used it to kill Stephen Parent and shoot Wojtek Frykowski twice and to shoot Jay Sebring, Tom Coomer once. The problem is that the forensics doesn't support that, And this is a single action pistol. It's called an SAA, single action army issue. Stephen Wise, a little Jewish boy, age 10, found it on September 1st, 1969, off of North Beverly Glen Drive, North Beverly Glen Boulevard in Sherman Oaks. If you watch my videos, that's in close proximity to Encino, where Phil Hartman was done away with, murdered. This is where Jose Menendez used to live near this neighborhood. And this is where Stephen Wise allegedly found this pistol. Now, I've been by that area. I'm telling you, the probability that a 10-year-old little boy, Stephen Wise, could find a pistol on that hillside is pretty close to zero, okay? Pretty close to zero. Plus, I don't believe he's working on a sprinkler. It's a dump. That house where Stephen Wise allegedly lived, it's a friggin' dump. And all the homes at the end of that cul-de-sac are dumps. It's embarrassing. So I don't think anyone was doing any gardening in that neighborhood. But anyway, that's the story. And then the media projects it out there that that's Ronald Reagan's pistol, even though there's no serial number on the pistol and there's no chain of ownership of that gun. And they didn't bother to do the ballistics test on that thing until 1970, before the murder trial started. And when they did, the ballistics didn't match up with the bullets, the 7 bullets pulled out of the bodies. But Judge Older allowed that Ronald Reagan look-alike pistol to be admitted into the Charlie Manson murder trial, even though the ballistics didn't match and there's no proof of ownership. And the ballistics test wasn't performed for at least 90 days after Stephen Wise found it, and that would have been a month after the murders. So it's been sitting outdoors for over a month. There'll be no fingerprints on it at all. They're gone within 24 hours when you leave something outdoors. So it's poppycock on all ever. You got fake story, fake defendant, fake evidence, and you're implicating the governor of California, Ronald Reagan. That's what they do. They want Ronald Reagan. They're sending him a message. Hey, maybe we're going to call you in to testify, or maybe we're going to charge you as accessory with Charlie Manson, right? Maybe you gave Charlie Manson the gun. Maybe Shorty Shea didn't do it. Maybe Ronald Reagan did. So Ronald Reagan is, through the media, implicated in the Sharon Tate, Tom Coomer, Stephen Parent murders. Ronald Reagan. And he's the governor of California in 1969. And the media is toying with Ronald Reagan. In September 1969, Ronald Reagan's been the governor for 2 years, barely, about 2 years. And they're implicating him with the Charlie Manson, murder case. Although, again, there's no Charlie Manson in the story yet. That doesn't really happen until December 12th, 1969 is when we are introduced to Charlie Manson. But before we're introduced to Charlie Manson, we're introduced to Ronald Reagan having a deadly pistol with a long barrel. The reason they want you to know it's a long barrel is because a rifle was used. It is not a pistol. It was a rifle. The Suran pistol was tiny. The Thane Eugene Caesar pistol was tiny. The pistol that killed Art Linklatter's son-in-law, John Zwire, that was tiny. There's a lot of tiny 22 caliber pistols, but the pistols used at the Cielo Drive murders were rifles, not pistols. Just telling you, they were M16 rifles if you want to be real specific. M16. All right, so just to top it off, Ronald Reagan becomes president. Right when I meet him, he's 69 years old. He takes the oath of office. What's the next thing that happens, people? Well, the next thing that happens is that he gets, John Hinckley shoots him, right? A fake assassination attempt on March 30th, 1981. This is right after I met Ronald Reagan. So people, if you think I'm implicated, I can understand that. I shook his hand, in December before Christmas. And then literally 90 days later, this John Hinckley situation happens where Ronald Reagan and 6 other people are shot with a 22 caliber pistol, a small one, just like the one that was used with Robert Kennedy, just like the one that was found on Suran, right? Just like the one that was found with John Zwire, Art Linklatter's son-in-law, is the same kind of pistol that's used with John Hinckley, right? What do you think the probability is that all these presented shootings happen with the same CIA issue 22 caliber pistol? I mean, it's very common. They use the same type of gun. over and over again. Except my intel is that Ronald Reagan was hit with a pneumatic air gun, electronic air gun, and it was shot, a dart, Plachette was shot into his rear rib cage. And he was taken to the CIA hospital, you know, where they do fake autopsies of JFK, Bethesda Navy Hospital, Navy Intelligence Hospital, where he recovers, but his popularity goes way up after this attempted assassination by John Hinckley, who seems to know the George Bush family very well, who's vice president. He's the Kamala Harris of the Ronald Reagan era. Anyway, what happens after the Ronald Reagan recovery from the assassination? Then we have the murder of his best man, William Holden. Yeah, William Holden gets bludgeoned into his head with a blunt force instrument without his pajama bottoms in his luxury apartment in Santa Monica. Ronald Reagan's best man, Nancy Davis's best man, is murdered in his apartment and found after 2 or 3 days of being dead. That's on or around, we don't really know, November 12th, 1981 is when they found his body. He's dating Stephanie Powers, who's a Polish Jewish girl from Beverly Hills. Stephanie Powers, Polish Jewish girl. She's working with Robert Wagner. Robert Wagner, who lived at 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive, where Natalie Wood lived and slept in Natalie's bed when she was 18 years old, living in that place. And Robert Wagner's living in that place. It's a gated CIA compound. It's right above the William Shatner murder scene for Noreen. It's right above. It's close. As the crow flies, it's about a mile distance from that swimming pool where Noreen Shatner was killed to where Natalie Wood never learned to swim in her swimming pool, where Robert Wagner lived, where Cass Elliot lived, where Dan Aykroyd lived, where Beverly DeAngelis lived. It's about a mile to the swimming pool where Noreen Elizabeth Kidd Shatner was murdered. And Robert Wagner is close proximity to Natalie Wood when she's murdered in Santa Catalina Harbor at 3 o'clock in the morning in 55-degree temperatures. 2 weeks after William Holden is murdered. And William Holden is dating Stephanie Powers, who's working with Robert Wagner for 5 years in heart-to-heart television series. And this is Ronald Reagan's best friend, who gets whacked. So you see, they sent him a message about you could be implicated in the Sharon Tate murder with the .22 caliber buntline pistol that was not used in the murder of anyone at Cielo Drive. Then they sent him a murder by murdering his best man, right? Then they murder Natalie Wood, which he knew her, and she's murdered 2 weeks after his best man's murdered. Anyway, that takes me back to the Ronald Reagan Ranch, known as Rancho del Cielo, 688 acres on the hillside of Santa Barbara. I've been on the property. I am mystified to tell you there are 3 ways to get on that property. And the way that I would use is the Santa Ynez mission, named after Abigail Folger's mother. It's 12.5 miles from the mission of Solvang to get to the gate of Rancho del Cielo, where Ronald Reagan had 4 dogs and 7 horses on that property. It's a spectacular, beautiful property. I can't recommend it enough. It's quintessential California. There are 7 multi-million-dollar concrete reinforced bridges that you go over. It hardly rains much up there, but when it does, it rains a lot. There's a lot of water flash flooding, and these bridges will hold up. It's on North Refugio Road is the way that I went in. You can also come in off of Pacific Coast Highway 1, aka Highway 101, from State Refugio Park at the bottom of the hill, the bottom of the Ronald Reagan Ranch, and you can climb. It's a very potholed, rough road, and you go past Guacamole Ranch, and above that, it's a 9.5 mile uphill curvaceous road to the same gate that I got to, using the North Refugio Road. So you can use South Refugio Road. They don't call it South. They just call it Refugio Road off of Highway 101. It'll end up to the same place that the North Refugio Road from Solvang will take you to. Or you can go over to Highway 154 at the San Marcos Grade Summit, and you can use West Camino Cielo, which is the highway of the sky. And you can come in that way. That's looking like, as the crow flies, that's probably 16 miles. However, the road is very curvaceous. There's a gun range you go through, and that's going to be about a 18 to 20 mile distance on a very potholed road. Almost nobody goes in that way in a car. And there are no trespassing signs posted, people, to restrict access. This Ronald Reagan Ranch was allegedly purchased in 1998 by the Young American Foundation. Young American Foundation is code for CIA, all right? And the Young Republicans, which William Buckley, that I don't want to get into, he's such an odious person who engages in applied linguistics. Applied linguistics is sophistry, people. Let's just do a little definition check on sophistry, because that's what applied linguistics is. I think it's more accurate to just call it what it is. Applied linguistics is sophistry. Sophistry is a noun, okay? And it has to do with a fallacious argument. Its synonyms are specious reasoning or the use of fallacious arguments. It's also a debating tool, and it's the use of using fallacious arguments, especially with the intention of deceiving the audience or your debate rhetoric opponent. And that was what William F. Buckley was known for at Yale University, was that he was the best. He took rhetoric, and he was the number one debater. But he was a liar, liar, pants on fire, coward who engaged in sophistry. So he never, ever, 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 ever dealt with any topics head on. He always wanted to discredit the opponent and to get off track and distract. That's what William F. Buckley was all about. He came from Illuminati, oil wealth. He was a phony, fake person. But he is part of the Ronald Reagan Rancho del Cielo story, because he founded the Young Republicans back in the 1950s with the CIA's assistance. That was then transferred into Young America Foundation in 1969, okay? And then after Ronald Reagan was associated with the ranch, they swooped in and purchased it, and then they posted these no trespassing signs. So, if you want to get to the gate of the ranch, you're probably going to be surveilled on the cameras, which they have hidden in those beautiful oak trees. I'm not saying you can't do it. You can do it. It is possible. You can't necessarily drive a car there. I think they will dispatch security personnel or a helicopter if you try to drive a car to the ranch. But you could walk. People do hike that who live in the Santa Barbara County area. I see hikers. It's a rigorous, rigorous hike. And if you're not physically fit, you're going to not necessarily enjoy it. You're going to get blisters on your toes. Thanks for listening. Have a nice day. Take care. Hit the like button, please. Thanks.